welcome everybody. It's great to have you here. We are at the Energy Indaba at the EU Energy Day. It's a great privilege for me to be here and to be moderating this session. My name is Manfred Braun. I am the Sustainability Director at the University of Cape Town. We have some great panelists joining us today from both the private sector, the public sector, as well as research, and I'll welcome them shortly. And yeah, I really hope you enjoy this session. I just wanted to ask if any of you have questions in the audience, please post those in the chat. And during the session, those will be responded to in writing. So please feel free as the session goes on to post your questions in the chat. We're going to kick us off today with Gaspard Demur. Is that, am I saying that correctly, Gaspard?
It's perfect.
Okay, cool. Gaspard, if you can maybe just introduce yourself to start off with and kind of tell us what your role is at the EU, and then I can kind of pose a bit of a question to you that we're going to be talking about, but maybe if you're going to start off with a bit of introduction to yourself. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot to this opportunity to speak in front of you. So my name is Gaspard Demur, working in the European Commission, DG Energy. I'm in the unit in charge of the renovation wave, so dealing with energy efficient renovation of buildings. And I'm team leader there for the national strategy for renovation and for the energy recovery. So to make sure that the renovation of buildings is having an important place in the economic recovery program post-COVID that the EU is organizing for the moment.
Okay, great. I'm just going to give each of the panelists a quick opportunity to introduce themselves so the audience knows who they're looking at. So Coralie, if you could maybe introduce yourself as well.
Hi, sure. I'm Coralie van Reunen from the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, particularly the Functional Building Infrastructure Impact Area. So as the name tells you, we research particularly our unit in infrastructure and have a focus now on energy efficiency and sustainability in buildings.
Great, thank you. And then Chilu, if you could introduce yourself as well.
Thanks, Manfred. My name is Chilu Lombe from Solid Green Consulting. We're green building consultants based in Johannesburg. And yeah, also very happy to be here and take part in here.
Great, thanks. Luvuyo, if you could also just introduce yourself. I know, unfortunately, we don't have you on camera, but it's great to have you join as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Luvuyo Jovan. I work for the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, and working as an energy efficiency specialist, we initiate and monitor projects in a number of economic sectors, including the residential sector. Part of work we do is energy efficiency in buildings. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Luvuyo. Before we start with Gaspard, I just wanted to provide a bit of context to this session, just considering building specifically, and this session being focused on energy efficiency. If you look at globally, buildings are responsible for about 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, which is really a significant proportion of greenhouse gas emissions. And the number of buildings are projected to double by 2060. And so there's this real opportunity and need to address energy consumptions in buildings. And I know with the cost of renewable energy coming down, that's been a very attractive option, and a lot of building owners have opted for that, and maybe energy efficiency has taken a bit of a back step, but I think it's still critical. We can't only focus on renewable energy, and so that's really why I think this session is so important, is to really reinvigorate the focus on energy efficiency. You might have also heard about the energy performance certificate regulations that were promulgated in South Africa in December last year. which is really significant. And we've got the Department of Minerals and Energy Resources to talk to that as well. But also, we have with us some experience that can be shared from the EU. EPCs, or energy performance certificates, have been in place for a number of years and really had a significant impact. The EU also has significant investment in refurbishments, deep retrofits, and a lot of that takes into account energy efficiency as well. And a lot of jobs are created through that. Interestingly, the percentage sort of target for energy and building refurbishments is about 3%, but we'll talk about some of those targets in the EU as well a little bit later. So Gaspar, I wanted to start with you, and if you could maybe just reflect a little bit on the experience in Europe around energy efficiency and EPCs and the kind of impact this has had both on greenhouse gas emissions, but also in terms of jobs. Would be really great to hear your perspective on that. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Manfred. It's really interesting to see that. I mean, we have a joint analysis in reality on the effect of energy efficiency on climate and mitigation, and also on the fight against climate change. Just to give you a number of key data in the EU as regards buildings. We see that in the European Union, we have more or less only 1% of our building stock that are undergoing energy efficient renovation every year. So the reason of energy efficient renovation is not as high as we would need for reaching our climate target. So really, for us, it's a major area for improvement, for further efforts. We have assessed that more or less 75% of our building stock is energy inefficient. In Europe, we have a lot of buildings that have been built in the 19th century or beginning of the 20th century, in a period of time where energy efficiency was not at the center of the focus. So we have this building stock that we need to improve. And maybe a final number, we have 35 million of buildings to renovate if we want to reach our goal. So really the challenge is huge. So that's the reason why we have adopted on the 14th of October 2020 a new flagship initiative at EU level. We call that the renovation wave, and the idea is about to prolong the effort that we have been pushing for years on energy efficiency in buildings. You mentioned energy performance certificates. They are in place in Europe for a period of time. But we want to go further. And the idea is really to have a kind of integrated approach to building renovation, putting together financing programs, increasing mandatory elements related to the performance of buildings, one-stop shop for citizens to understand how they can use these different instruments, specific focus on energy poverty. So the renovation wave is putting all that together. It is, of course, a very important endeavor at a moment when with the COVID situation, we have an important economic crisis in Europe. And it's really seen at EU level as one of the main area for job creation. We consider that for 1 million invested in energy efficiency in buildings, we can create between 12 and 18 jobs. So in a very conservative way, we could say that with the renovation wave, we could create 160,000 new green jobs. But this is really the conservative number. This could be much higher because the building sector in Europe is very much based on SMEs. So 90% of the companies that are working in the construction field are small or medium-sized companies. These are local jobs that are created through this stimulus. And that's the reason why in the context of the recovery and resilience facility that the EU is putting in place for fighting against the kind of economic consequences of the COVID crisis. We are insisting a lot on the energy efficiency in buildings dimension. So we have set the framework for this recovery facility. We are receiving for the moment the draft plans from the different member states in the EU and looking at these plans. And of course, what we see is that member states are putting a strong focus on renovation of buildings in that context, precisely because it's a big job creator. So we are in a dialogue with the member states to make sure that in that context, the money that will be allocated, what we see for the moment is that more or less 10% of the total investment foreseen are going to energy efficient renovation. So what we try to see is that this investment is not just going to light renovation, but pushing also for deep renovation, with trying to have more than 30% of energy efficiency gain in that exercise. So it's a very useful momentum in a sense. We have the political dimension with the renovation wave. We have a big exercise of fighting the economic crisis, and we try to put that together for energy efficiency in buildings. And just to finish on my short introduction, we really see this renovation wave, or this kind of push for energy efficiency in buildings, as a way to reconcile really energy efficiency and renewables. Because if we want to go for deep renovation, we will need, of course, insulation, double glazing, these normal solutions, but also to increase the use of renewables for heating and cooling in buildings. So this is a way to reconcile these two very important dimensions of the fight against climate change. I'll stop there, and I'm very happy to be able to speak with you and reply to any question you may have.
Great, thank you, Gaspar. It's really fascinating to kind of see the progress that's been happening in Europe over many years around energy efficiency, starting way back in the 70s already. And we can really learn a lot from what's happened there. And I mean, I think the benefit is that we can also leapfrog. We don't have to wait 50 years to do all of this. We can do this immediately, many of it. And so the other thing that I really found quite interesting is the critical role of policy. And EU, I think, has played a really critical role around developing policy for the European nations to follow. And I think that's where I want to bring in Luvuyo, who represents our own government here, and the policies that they've been putting forward. So Luvuyo, can you maybe tell us a little bit about the latest regulation that's been passed around EPCs and some of the aspirations that the department has around energy performance? Would be really useful to hear from the department. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Manfred. Yes, indeed, there were regulations on the mandatory display of energy performance for buildings, gazetted in December last year. I think this emanates from our National Energy Act of 1998 and 2000, which in the end culminated in 2005 with the publication of National Energy Efficiency Strategy, which looked at various ways in how to save energy, conserve energy, and be able to meet the demand. As you know, historically, our country at some point in time, we had cases where supply, rather demand, outstripped the supply. So this strategy was meant at least to find ways in order to reserve necessity to develop new generation capacity. This strategy back then in 2005 had a nationwide target of 12% for improvements in energy efficiency. Also included in that strategy of 2005 was the buildings improvement energy efficiency of 15%, using a baseline of 2000 up until 2015. From what we've realized, after we've developed what became energy efficiency target monitoring system, which was meant to track changes and monitor what is happening in terms of the implementation of the strategy. We've realized, particularly in the building sector, that is both the public and commercial sector, that there is a greater potential to further dive deep in terms of the projects that we have in that field, and also in collaboration with the aim to reduce GHG emissions. We've actually partnered with a number of departments, including our environment, Department of Public Works, which is a great potential in terms of building portfolio. So it has a very, very big potential in terms of making us realize our targets. Post to that, in 2015, we've now developed another new strategy, because the one that we developed in 2005 expired in 2015. So we developed post-2015 strategy, which is a trajectory up to 2030, with aspirational targets for a number of sectors, including the commercial and public sector, with the aim that by 2030, we'll have great impacts coming out from the public and commercial sector, hoping that at least we'll have a reduction in final energy consumption of about 33% in those two sectors, both public and commercial sector. So this necessitated, in terms of the plans and the proposal from the post-2015 National Energy Efficiency Strategy, to look at ways in how we could actually assist particularly the commercial and the public sector in realizing those particular targets. Part of the National Energy Efficiency Action Plans was that we need to find ways to be able to understand the building energy demand and the energy consumption, which in the strategy that is post-2015, there's a proposal to develop energy performance certificates for both the commercial buildings and the public buildings. Hence the gazetting of the regulations in December last year. We are hoping that by doing that, at least we'll be able to understand what are the potentials within public buildings and commercial buildings, and be able to monitor and perhaps in the end try to find ways on how do we actually even actually develop what became minimum energy performance standards for those particular buildings. So we're hoping with these EPCs, we'll be able going forward to look at what we have in terms of the national business for EPC register that SANED is going to register. We'll be able to track changes in the building sector and be able to further now develop new policy in terms of whether we minimize the current EPCs gazetting in terms of the standards as we actually going forward. So in the next 2 years or so, we'll be able to have a better understanding on how to actually go forward in this regard. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lavoyo. It's really good to see South African government move forward in this direction. Since December, I've noticed a big sort of jolt in the industry, and the industry really waking up. What is this implication? What is the implication of the EPCs on industry, on the public sector? And I've already had a number of conversations where people are mobilizing and preparing now for EPCs. So I think it's the impact will really be felt, and it's really going to help drive the industry forward. It's great also to have some perspective from the research institutions like CSR here today. So I really want to welcome Coralie, and just want to give Coralie an opportunity to tell us a little bit about her experience and research, and particularly in some of the work that the cities are doing, the exciting work that's happening there in the metros, where really they are responsible for a lot of building stock themselves, but also obviously to influence what happens in those cities. So Coralie, I'll let you tell us a little bit about your experience in this space. Thanks.
Thanks, Manfred. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, the CSIR has been involved most specifically with the city of Tshwane, but then also with the other 5 cities, which I'll tell you about now, in assisting with developing local policy, sort of at municipal building plan approval level, to promote energy efficiency in buildings. So the 5 South African cities that have committed to making this shift towards reducing carbon emissions and actually targeting net zero carbon for all new buildings are the city of Tshwane, the city of Joburg, Cape Town, eThekwini municipality, and the city of Ekurhuleni now also recently. And they've committed to this through their involvement in the C40 Cities South Africa New Buildings program, which was launched in 2018 in partnership with Sustainable Energy Africa. So this has actually established a core group of 5 cities, Sustainable Energy Africa, to work together to establish policies for the cities. Obviously, we know that building operational energy contributes significantly to the city's greenhouse gas emissions. And so obviously we need to take action to mitigate this. And these actions are now being implemented through development of local policy. All 5 cities have progressed to some degree towards developing this net zero carbon building policy in each of their cities. So they're all slightly different depending on the context of that specific city. And these policies will be implemented through bylaws. So the exception actually is the city of Tshwane, because the city of Tshwane already had a green building development policy and bylaw. So rather than establishing a new net zero carbon building policy, they are, along with the CSIR, adapting and updating the green building development policy to include net zero targets. So all of this falls under the city's climate adaptation plan, which looks at a lot of different things. So this is only one action that the city is taking. As you know, the national building regulations have already started the market on a course to lower energy consumption in buildings. So the intention of the city's policies is to go beyond the minimum requirements of the national regulations and aggressively target net zero carbon buildings, which means promoting the use of on or off-site renewable energy. But the idea is to first drive the baseload energy use intensity of buildings as low as possible through passive design, good material choice, etc. And thereafter, renewable energy should be used for baseload and operational requirements. So the bylaws are tailored to supplement and complement the national regulations, and compliance will be required for building plan approval at local authority level. The required energy use intensity value stipulated in the national building regulations has been decreased through the bylaws. So as I said, the benefit of setting low energy use targets rather than merely stipulating that all buildings shall use renewable energy is to encourage responsible design first, and thus avoid an excessive burden on renewable energy generation. It's important to note that this only refers to the base load of the building, including heating, cooling, lighting, and other built-in services. The operational load of a building is not a matter of design, and thus it can't be evaluated when building plans are submitted for local authority approval. However, the bylaws do call for energy sub-metering, and this ties in a little bit with the EPCs as well, with a view to enable monitoring of operational energy consumption and possibly even enforcement in the future. The City of Tshwane bylaw also advances low carbon living beyond the building itself by supporting low carbon mobility through bicycle facilities and electric vehicle facilities in buildings. So that brings that connection of building to the city. And so it's looking at the bigger picture while looking at the smaller picture. At the same time, the bylaw is also cognizant of being inclusive. In other words, not to be overly burdensome on the building designer or owner. If I compare this to green rating systems like the Green Star rating in South Africa, or LEED or BREEAM or things like that. Those are very ambitious and quite an effort to achieve. So the bylaws are taking just the low-hanging fruit, the core elements, to drive building efficiency down for the regular guy on the street type of thing. So to allow the market to adjust for the steeper requirements, the energy efficiency improvement per building type will be gradually stepped up over a number of years, starting with a period of a baseline compliance with the national building regulations, which are about to be updated.
Thank you, Coralie, for that perspective. It's really fascinating to hear what the cities are up to and really moving the bar in terms of policy that's going to shift what's happening in those cities. From a private sector perspective, I think energy efficiency has been kind of playing a major role for probably the last 20 years already, where the private sector has largely been driven, I think, from a commercial perspective with cost savings. But it's really great to have Chulu here from Solid Green, who's been working in the space for many years and has got some great experience to share in this regard. So Chulu, if you can maybe just tell us a little bit about what your experience is, what you've seen in terms of energy efficiency. Is the industry embracing it? Are jobs being created? What is your sense around what the private sector is doing, sort of has been doing in the past, and what you think the private sector is going to be doing going into the next 5 to 10 years? Thanks.
Cool. Thanks. Thanks, Manfred. I think it's a bit of a tough one, because there's kind of our experience around the discussion of the effort versus the reality of it. You know, I think that in terms of the discussion, there's definitely a very big interest in energy efficiency in buildings. But specifically in the commercial sector, you know, we find that probably the easiest part of all of this, particularly in our climate, which is in relation to comfort and actual building design. You know, when you see the examples of the buildings we're building currently, you kind of see that there's a bit of a disconnect there in terms of the easiest part of energy efficiency within buildings, because that's the easiest item to do. So I think the onset of something like the EPCs, where people are going to have to actually present what type of energy performance their buildings are going to do, might just be the thing to do the trick, where in the design of the building, you can actually look at the design of the building and look at energy efficiency from first principles. You know, I think definitely in terms of embracing technology, there's been a very big increase in that, you know, whether it is technology around your type of lighting or air conditioning systems, and renewable energy as well, which is much easier to deal with than dealing with items from first principles. I think in terms of job creation, you probably find that there's been a bigger impact from renewable energy, because it's always easier to do the offset first, you know, rather than to really investigate your building and see what needs to be done. And you know, in the green building certification work that we do around existing buildings, you can always see this, because the energy efficiency journey is actually a very long and difficult one. So when buildings want to go down that route of looking at their buildings, and you know, we kind of say to them, look, we need to install some meters first, we need to see where your energy is going, then you need to have a plan in place that you're going to roll out initiatives over the next 2 years. You know, people sort of, they don't want that, you know, they want an instant fix almost. And renewable energy always provides that, albeit at a much higher capital cost. You know, we're seeing a lot of buildings just have operational issues and not really technology or design issues. So there's definitely still a lot of room to maneuver, and I think the EPCs might just be the silver bullet, because it'll mean that everyone can see how their buildings perform, and they can see if they're out or if they're in, and there'll be, there's that natural competition that will be developed, and people will actually want to make their buildings better first. And then, when any process, when you're looking at retrofits, you always look at efficiency first and then renewable energy second. I think we're currently very, very technology focused and not the first principles of buildings.
Cool. Thank you, Chulu. That's a really interesting perspective. I'd be quite interested to hear the European experience, just in terms of how the European market has responded in terms of policy versus sort of private sector, commercially driven response. And Gaspard, what your thoughts are on whether the market is kind of moving ahead of policy typically and kind of advancing faster, or whether policy is sort of has become a key driver and the major driver rather than sort of the commercial drive to save money. I'm not sure if you can share some of your thoughts maybe on that in terms of whether policy versus commercial driver, which are the biggest drivers?
Thanks a lot, Manfred. I mean, surely what we try to do now at EU level is to provide legal certainty to the private, to the private actors and to companies. I think it is very important for investment and for innovation to take place, and it takes place in the EU, surely, in the field of energy efficiency for buildings. But if we want to increase that, we really need to set very clear objectives for 2030, 2040, 2050. And that's really what we try to do, to set clear goals for member states with a path. We have a number of instruments for that. So we have what we call the Green Deal at EU level, so setting the objective of climate neutrality for 2050. That's the kind of primary goal. And then we have a plan for each member state, each nation, with a number of milestones to reach that objective. That's what we call the national energy and climate plans for EU member states. And we also have long-term renovation strategies for each nation, so that they can precisely first assess the situation of their building stock and establish milestones for the next 30 years. And I really think that this kind of legal certainty or policy certainty, in a way, is really improving the investment and the journey of the private sector towards energy efficiency. We have also introduced, EPCs in 2002 in our legislation at EU level, in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, and we see the effect on the market for some decades now. The question is, how do we go the next step? And we see some countries really looking at the legal effect of the energy performance certificates now. We are thinking at EU level of potential obligation for certain minimum level of energy performance, for instance, for being able to rent a property. So you see, for instance, countries like France that are looking really at the worst performing segment of the building stock, thinking about obligation for reaching minimum level of energy performance standards to stay on the renting market, for instance. This is something we are contemplating also at EU level. We are very in the preliminary phase of that reflection, because of course this has huge implication for the housing market, and also for property, as simply as that. So we are looking at that in impact assessments to assess the potential consequences, but this is something we are really looking at. Now, this is not the only leverage for improving energy efficiency, and we see that in Europe, companies are really looking at green energy efficiency dimension for buildings as a market opportunity. So the companies are not waiting for policies, I would say, for going ahead. We have many European companies that are leaders in that field, in the field of insulation, automation, smart metering. So the private sector is really running on that issue. But our role as policymakers is really, I think, to provide this kind of very long-term perspective. So if you invest as a company in that field, you know that in 2030, 2040, and 2050, you have precise objectives and you can invest in that direction. So I would say this is a bit our approach to it.
Great, thank you, Gaspar. I think that's a really key thing is for the private sector to have that policy certainty and to kind of have a window into the future, what it's going to be looking like for them and how they're going to be impacted, which is really touching on some of the things that Julie was saying as well, is the market will respond to now suddenly there being EPCs in place. I wanted to also just hear from Luvuyo in that regard. I know, Luvuyo, you did touch on this earlier. Is the timing maybe of introducing sort of a minimum requirement for energy efficiency? At the moment, the EPC regulation is only requiring display, but at some point it will require some sort of minimum, whether you're at level B or C or D. Can you give us a bit of, if possible, a line of sight into that, say now for office buildings, just to take an example, what could that potentially look like in the next 10 years? You did touch on a little bit earlier, but maybe would be useful just to kind of focus in on this aspect and just to kind of get a sense of what we might be looking at that could impact the private sector around what we're talking about, things like policy certainty. Thanks, Luvuyo.
Okay, thank you, Manfred. Yes, indeed. I think when you look at the trajectory perhaps of our strategy, which goes up to 2030, I think we are hoping that we'll have targets that we achieve over a period of 5 years in terms of the reviews and so forth. When this regulation was introduced, there was an indication that it's mandatory that in the next 2 years that buildings of a certain measure, for instance, in the commercial sector, those that are greater than 1,000 square meters, and in the public sector, rather in the public sector, those that are greater than 1,000 square meters will have to display the EPCs, and in the private sector, those that are greater than 2,000 square meters will have to display the EPCs. In the first 2 years, then the thinking is that we'll be able to learn what is happening in the market, what is the building energy demand and energy consumption, and we'll be able to learn thereafter when we have some data in the National Business Register in terms of EPCs, what is happening in the market, how can we go back to the standards and look at the maximum energy performance of a building, perhaps to make it more stricter in that sense. But in the near horizon, there's no indication that stricter measures will be taken drastically. I think for the first 2 years, at least it gives an indication of what is going to happen in the market. And if you look at the categories of the buildings that are subjected to these regulations, it's only 4 out of 8. There's also a need perhaps to think about how do we actually go to the other categories that are not affected by the regulation. So there's a lot to learn, and we are learning from our partners as well in the European Union and other international countries in how they have actually implemented the EPCs. I would say perhaps maybe your reviews will be made after at least we have received some data in terms of the register, which will be hosted at Senate in that regard. But I understand that everyone is concerned, and as Gaspar was saying, that in terms of even in terms of the commercial sector for renting, if now it becomes mandatory that we've got minimum energy performance of the building, then some people are really going to be concerned. But I think as part of the department, we're hoping that any changes will happen gradually, like this regulation is happening gradually. There's a grace period of about 2 years. At least don't expect that within very short space of time we'll be able to make drastic measures. And also the advantage of it is that for every regulation that we publish, we normally have wide a range of stakeholder consultations. We've got also technical committees that are meant to give guidance to the standards that we have. The SANS 10,400 XA, which look at the buildings regulations, rather the buildings themselves, and the only, and also the SANS 1544, which look at the EPC themselves. So inputs will be generated through those technical committees within those standards. So we'll be able to gradually transform the market in the direction at least that we see when we receive the actual data. Thank you.
Thank you, Luvuyo. Yeah, I think it's really important what you're saying about engaging stakeholders, and also what you said about the department collecting and understanding the data that's coming in from the EPCs that are going to be collected to really understand where the market is, so that you can really make an informed decision around where to set targets. One of the things that I also picked up is just through you talking is the effort and the time that goes into developing these policies and regulations. Really, you want to get it right, and you have to engage extensively. These things take a lot of time. When I was still working at the Green Building Council, I think we went about 10 years ago with your colleague Kolile Mabuzela and Sanedi Barry Burdenkamp to Germany to go and have a look at sort of EPCs and the impact that they're having. And out of that started sort of the conversations around this regulation. And it's fascinating to see how the sort of stages of developing new policy, the effort and the sort of the work that goes into it. So we really shouldn't minimize the work that you as a department have to do. And the impacts of these regulations are massive. As Chulu was pointing out, it's something that we can't take lightly. And so I really want to congratulate the department on promulgating this regulation. It is going to kind of set real waves and positive waves, I think, in the industry and the energy sector. So really looking forward to see how the market responds. One of the things that I just wanted to pick out on is also, I mean, technology has changed quite a lot over the past 10, 20 years, and energy efficiency has been around for a while, but I was interested to hear maybe some of the things that you as a panel are seeing in terms of energy efficiency and advancements and the type of innovation that's happening. So Coralie, maybe if you could share if there's anything that you kind of observing in industry or in the cities in terms of the things that they're doing on their own buildings that are sort of really kind of the typical forms of innovation around how to achieve energy efficiency, would be great to hear.
Thanks. In terms of what the cities themselves are doing, I know that City of Tshwane's new head offices that well, I suppose they're not so new anymore, but a number of years ago, Munitoria burned down and eventually they rebuilt it, and that's actually Green Star rated. And I think that that's a wonderful way of really showing the city, putting your money where your mouth is, not just saying, you know, you guys must be green and energy efficient, but actually doing it. So I think that was a great step. Something that came out in the stakeholder engagements that we had for the development of the policies was exactly that thing. People say we want to see the cities doing it. And I think the cities have really heard that message and will start making more and more effort in their own buildings to set the example. And then in terms of the research space, one of the big gaps, and this is where EPCs are going to help a lot, is it's very difficult to measure progress in energy efficiency because we don't have data. And now the EPCs are going to help us actually start collecting data. And over the years, we'll hopefully see that change. So in terms of research, that's a gap that we have found. And then something that the CSR Energy Centre is busy with is looking at electric vehicles, and this again ties in with the cities because they are moving towards non-motorized transport, and how that can be used. Charging stations can be used to offset carbon and things like that. So there's a lot of research going on in that space and innovation. CSR is working with the municipalities on this. So that's quite exciting. I think a space to be watching.
Absolutely. Thanks, Coralie. I'm really excited about that. I know somebody on the panel has been driving an electric vehicle for a few years now. Chilu, are you enjoying the Nissan Leaf still?
We had the electric car for about 4 years, I think, and it was really fantastic. You know, we had, you know, we dealt with all the questions around, can I drive to Durban and all of those things, but you know, we used it as a company car, and we never had any issues, you know, with range and all of that. We would, you know, go to Pretoria and back and all of that. Of course, we ended up knowing where all the charging stations were. And what was quite interesting is that, you know, we had a solar installation at our previous office, and our energy use was very low. So the bulk of our energy actually used to go to the electric car. So it was great for us. But you know, with COVID now, we have very little need for an office, much less a company car. So we kind of gave it back, traded it back in at the beginning of last year.
Chili, I wanted to ask you your perspective in the private sector as well around innovation and energy efficiency, whether, I mean, when I was working as a consulting engineer in the space, it was kind of all about compact fluorescence and VRV, and that was kind of the big drive. But we've obviously moved a long way from that. And kind of now we're 2021. What are the kind of sort of most common innovations you're seeing around energy efficiency in buildings?
You're giving your age away there, Manfred. You know, I honestly think that what is starting off small as an innovation is pretty simple, which is data. You know, like what we found now is that the last sort of 4 or 5 years, a lot of the design elements have sort of plateaued in terms of what we expect and how we expect buildings to be. But now that there is some data coming back, because, you know, Green Star with the sub-metering and everything, we're starting to see that buildings have got much better potential than what we designed them for. So, for example, if you start out thinking a building requires 80 VA per square meter, you know, and then you, in reality, you find that without trying much, that they are averaging on 35 or 40. I think that kind of helps to drive within the design process. I would say that the biggest innovation is we're seeing new rating systems that focus more on comfort. And I think that is helping a lot in sort of I would say the fight in energy efficiency, because, you know, if you focus on comfort first, then most buildings, you know, there's certain designs that just cannot happen without the mitigation. You know, most of the times we find that with our climate, it's actually very easy to design for the environment. You know, as long as the sun doesn't hit anything, most places temperatures are mild. So yeah, technology, VRV and lights, I think that's where it ended. We haven't really seen anything very, very new within buildings. You know, we're definitely trying to optimize within the solutions that we currently have. And a lot of times the idea of innovation implies that you've dealt with all the basics. And I think we're still, even within the commercial sector, we're still dealing with a lot of the things that in other markets might be considered as the basics.
It's a very good point you make, and it ties in with comfort and something we at the moment are doing on one of our projects. It'll be the first for us as a university, and it's still quite new, I think, in South Africa. It's very common in Europe, but it's in slab heating and cooling, where you basically have piped water circulated in the slab. So you have radiant cooling or heating, and it's a lot more energy efficient than throwing air from the top down, heating or cooling that way. So in a way, it's interesting that it's a very old technology, but it's for South Africa, it's a form of innovation. Chile, back to you.
Yeah, I think just to, the example that you make is one that we often try and get on buildings. And the biggest hindrance to that type of technology is the actual building load. So you'll find that buildings are not being designed to be efficient enough for the more innovative solutions around particularly heating and cooling. So that then becomes another another issue. So radiant cooling is something that would work very well in our climate, but is seldom even thought about, let alone implemented. I think we had the first installation of chill ceiling in the country, like 25 square meters in our old office, and that was about it. But yeah, I think that's why I think a lot of the basics needs to be dealt with to enable innovation.
Absolutely. I'm going to let Gaspard come in.
Yeah, maybe just to give you, I mean, 2 or 3 trends that we are observing in the EU in terms of innovation. Maybe the first one is kind of a standardization in the industrialization. So we see that more and more companies try to work on surroundings, not single buildings, but try to really use the same technology for a large number of buildings, and we try to really cut the cost by this kind of industrialization standardization. We have a big project at EU level, which is called the Energiesprong, starting in the Netherlands, where we try to see how to deploy energy efficiency in a great number of buildings at the same time, to reduce cost as much as possible. So this is one trend. Another one, of course, is digitalization, not only for the smart metering and data gathering, but now more in the conception phase, in the design phase of large refurbishment projects. So when you have complex energy efficiency renovation to put in place, more and more you see a strong role of digitalization for the upstream concept, if you wish. I would say that we now have a challenge in terms of, 2 main challenges in terms of innovation. The first one is that we need to deal with our cultural heritage and the beauty of buildings. And this is a very big discussion in Europe in terms of energy efficiency, but at the same time, cultural heritage. So we are thinking about, putting together a number of stakeholders, artists, architects, engineers, around an initiative that we call the New Bauhaus, really to make sure that energy efficiency is not seen as a reduction in the beauty or the way our buildings are looking like, but it's a win-win situation. So I would say that's a big challenge, making sure that energy efficiency is an architectural gesture also, and important for citizens to feel that their home is better before than after energy efficiency renovation. And another big challenge is skills, because we really have a lot of new energy efficiency works ongoing, but we really see that we have shortages on the market for people that are precisely able to use digital tools in the construction sector, or really that are trained and certified so that their company can benefit from the financing schemes, because that's a condition in the first place to access public money. So the skills issue is really very important at EU level. I would say that finally we have 3 main areas for pushing innovation in the renovation wave. We want to focus on schools, on hospitals, and on social housing, because in a way, the kind of public buildings ministries have been the first target for renovation for public authorities. But we've seen with the COVID situation that hospitals could improve the situation in terms of energy efficiency, and the same goes for schools, universities, and social housing. So we will also focus in terms of a broad area on these three categories, and I'll stop there.
Sure, that sounds really fantastic, Gaspar. Thanks for sharing that. Pretty much out of time for today's session. I really want to thank our panelists. A really fascinating conversation. Just some key takeouts for me. I think obviously the sort of critical element that's at play now in the South African market is the introduction of energy performance certificates. If you are not aware of this, please download a copy of this. It's both the regulation, but also the SANS 10-1544 standard that tells you how the EPC has to be produced. Really important for you as a property owner or an industry stakeholder in that space to understand what the regulation is and what that standard is. But really also fantastic just to hear the different perspectives around the technologies, innovation that's happening, and the role of both the policy and market forces, and sort of balancing this element of energy efficiency being somewhat difficult versus renewable energy sometimes seeming a lot easier. But I think the key is the data that you actually need, and the EPCs are really going to be a driving force to inform how we move forward. So I'm going to end us there and thank our panelists. Thank you all so much for joining today, and thank the audience. And go well and good luck with your energy efficiency adventures. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.